How much worse does it have to get? Emergency care in collapse as England's A&E figures hit their worst ever. In one hospital Emily's visited today, a system at breaking point.
It's terrible for all the staff. It's extremely demoralising when you cannot give the care that you have been trained to give.
Wherever you look, patients suffering, queues backing up, hours of waiting for treatment. This is the reality in hospitals across the country, and people are furious.
My daughter could have a heart attack sitting here now. I want the government to open their eyes and see what is going on in these hospitals.
Well, Downing Street admits the situation is unacceptable, but with shocking waiting figures and another swathe of strikes looming after a pandemic, it's hard to picture a bigger crisis for the NHS. So what prospect of any change? Also on News at 10 tonight. After the Trump secret files scandal, now classified documents are found in President Biden's garage. As floods hit Britain, the UN says the last 9 years were the hottest on record and warns climate change targets are in danger of being breached.
Have you had a chance to read your brother's book at all, Your Royal Highness?
Breaking cover, William, Kate and the King get back to business after that book, and tributes to a guitar genius from some of the biggest legends in rock as they remember their hero, Jeff Beck.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. Ask any heart or stroke doctor. The sooner they can treat an emergency admission, the better the chances of that patient making a good recovery. The target for an ambulance to reach what are called Category 2 calls, which can include heart attacks and strokes, should be 18 minutes. The latest figures for England show the average was 1 hour and 32 minutes, a record and a very unwelcome one. There were record waits in accident and emergency too. We used to count 4 hours and above as bad. In December, 55,000 people had to wait 12 hours or more, well up on November. Downing Street accepted today that the NHS is under extreme pressure. It could hardly do anything else, but it stressed huge amounts of money have been invested to deal with just such pressure. Pressure all too visible in the faces of A&E staff and, of course, of patients and their families.
So, members of staff, for 10 o'clock huddle, thank you.
In the A&E department at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Woolwich, the overnight team have just handed over to staff on the day shift. It's a day like any other, very busy, and they're almost full already.
I always thought mornings were quieter. That's not the case, no?
Quieter, but not quiet at the moment.
Right,
so
okay.
I think we've had a chance to move some patients out, but we've still got patients occupying most of the cubicle.
Dr. Brooke is expecting up to 80 ambulances to arrive today. He's already opened his overflow areas to get patients in. And I ask if it's possible to care for them there in the best way possible.
In the best way, no, absolutely not. And something we often talk about is the least worst option. So, you know, it's trying to do the best that we can with the facilities and the space that we have.
The least worst option. I mean, how does that make you feel as a consultant?
Terrible. I mean, it's terrible for all the staff. It's extremely demoralising.
But before patients even get here, ambulance delays are also affecting care. A 95-year-old woman who had a fall at home is the next to arrive.
She's been laying on the floor for 3 hours, waiting for an ambulance to pick her up.
It looks like she may have to wait here now too.
Yeah, well, we've got to wait. There's not a lot I can do about it.
Leslie's mother may have to be put in an area not usually used for A&E, and the matron here says staffing those areas is always a problem.
Sometimes up to 35–40% shortage, that we have to actually escalate it and get staffing from the wards to come and help us to cover these areas.
When ambulances bring patients in, they would usually come through here to have a rapid assessment, but consultants aren't doing those assessments at the moment because this room is now filled with patients ready to leave A&E and go upstairs to a ward. If only there were any beds for them.
There could be if every patient on this ward was able to be discharged. They're all ready, but are waiting for care packages.
There'll be patients who are waiting to go to a care home placement. There are a couple of patients here who are homeless and have nowhere to go.
I can see all your planning now.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sort of like placements.
Yeah, we've got a
finding home.
Absolutely. I have the equivalent of three and a half wards worth of patients who aren't currently able to leave the organisation.
To improve flow, the hospital does ensure those leaving are out of their bed early, freeing it up for someone else. Back downstairs, the waiting room in A&E is overflowing. Anyone here has a 10-hour wait to see a clinician. Breeder's daughter had chest pains this morning. They've been sitting here for 5 hours.
I've been talking to them. I said, what's happening? And they went, oh, we're really packed out. We can't do any more. I said, I know. I do understand. I said, but the point is, my daughter could have a heart attack sitting here now. Thank God she ain't, but she could have. Do you know what I mean? I want the government to open their eyes and see what is going on in these hospitals. It's a disgrace.
What's happening here at the Queen Elizabeth is not unique. It's mirrored across the country from hospital to hospital and patient to patient. One wonders how long it can continue.
Well, that then is what pressure looks like in the NHS right now. Emily was telling one individual hospital story on one day. But Emily, the figures out today paint a much broader picture.
Yes, they do. And sadly, there is little good news in today's data from NHS England. In fact, many of the statistics break records, but for all the wrong reasons. Ambulance call handlers answered more 999 calls than ever before, more than 1 million in December. But response times were the worst we've ever seen. Those with Category 2 conditions like heart attacks or strokes had to wait on average an hour and a half for an ambulance. The target is 18 minutes, and the waits didn't stop there. Once in A&E, more than 170,000 patients who needed to be admitted had to wait more than 4 hours. In the same month last year, that was 120,000. But it was worse for others. More than 54,000 had to wait more than 12 hours for a bed. And if we put that into perspective, look at this. 10 years ago, there were just 14 patients who waited more than 12 hours. Now, we probably all know why patients can't get a bed quickly. You saw in my report, it's because hospitals are simply too full. Look at the number of people who are there every day with COVID in December. It jumped to an average of just over 7,000. That's more than in December 2021. However, back then, there wasn't any flu. Just 33 patients in hospital with that. But an average of nearly 3,000 were taking up beds with flu this December. And it's even worse now. Last week, hospitals had to find room for more than 5,000 flu patients. That's alongside those who are lying in beds, ready to be discharged and can't be. There was an average of 14,000 patients each day last week, and that's another record. But let's end on some brighter news. The waiting list has finally started to come down for the first time since the pandemic. It's dropped to 7.1 million, a fall of about 27,000. Now, the Prime Minister has pledged to cut waiting list. So, Julie, at least that's a promise he is so far keeping.
OK, Emily, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, those waits for ambulances, which Emily was mentioning there, of an hour and a half, were described by Downing Street as unacceptable. People are rightly concerned, the Prime Minister's spokesman said. He's correct, of course, not least because so many promises have been made about the NHS and simply not kept.
We're investing hugely in the NHS.
My current mission is to bring waiting times down.
The ones that need an appointment should get an appointment.
People will get the care they need more quickly.
So many promises.
Do you want to have one? You have one of mine.
And yet another Prime Minister taking heat over the NHS. Rishi Sunak asked about the health crisis while visiting Sea Scouts in Inverness.
I come from an NHS family, so I'm passionately committed to protecting the NHS, and I'm proud that we've invested record sums into the NHS.
Labour say that money isn't enough.
People are genuinely frightened about the state of NHS services because they know that perhaps for the first time in our country's history, when you call 999 or when you turn up at A&E, we can no longer be certain that we're getting the care that we need in a timely fashion.
Experts say the terrible ambulance response times and shocking waits in A&E show the NHS is unquestionably now in crisis.
What caused this?
I think a lot of factors are feeding into the pressure the NHS is under at the moment. I think one of the main ones is workforce. At the moment, the NHS, it doesn't have enough people. There are 133,000 vacancies, and the people it has, it's struggling to keep due to the enormous pressures they're under.
And that is why the political fallout from this crisis is not just about patients, but about staff. Nurses, paramedics, doctors and more tell us that those staff shortages mean they are feeling more stressed and even burnt out. It's on top of that, they say, that they've suffered years of real terms pay cuts. Which is why doctors and dentists were the latest to enter talks with government today, following nurses and ambulance workers earlier this week.
We made progress today from the point of view that the word no was not used at all during any of the conversations that we've had.
But there wasn't a yes either to their ask for a 26% pay rise for junior doctors, which is why they could soon follow colleagues onto the picket line. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Well, away from the problems of the health service now, and there was just a hint of movement in the talks between rail unions and the train operating companies to try to resolve their pay dispute. RMT and TSSA leaders left a meeting saying they were now working together with the rail delivery group to agree what a revised pay offer might look like. That doesn't mean the employers have made a new offer, just that they appear to be open to formulating one, progress of sorts. Now, it's a little awkward, to say the least, but barely a few months after President Biden criticised his predecessor Donald Trump for having a stash of classified White House documents stored in his Florida home, it turns out Mr Biden has done pretty much the same thing, and not just once but twice. The second lot turned up at his home in Delaware, part of it in his garage. The timing is not helpful either. He's said to be preparing to announce soon whether he plans to run again next year.
The president was arriving back from Mexico as the first signs of serious trouble emerged, with suggestions he had been at best careless with America's secrets. Today, Biden tried to quieten the storm.
Good morning.
But acknowledged that a second tranche of classified documents were kept in the garage of his house in Delaware, next to his sports car.
Classified material next to your Corvette? What were you thinking?
And by the way, my Corvette's in a locked garage. Okay, so it's not like you're sitting out in the street. People know I take classified documents and classified material seriously. I also said we're cooperating fully and completely with the Justice Department's review. Thank you very much.
But many questions are left unanswered.
Thank you very much.
This may be the garage concerned, seen in the background of an old TV advert when, as Vice President, he was explaining his deep affection for his Corvette.
I love this car. Nothing but incredible memories.
Today, the Attorney General is ramping up his investigation, underlining that this is a potentially serious legal and political setback for the President.
Under the regulations, the extraordinary circumstances here require the appointment of a special counsel for this matter. This appointment underscores for the public the Department's commitment to both independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters.
The FBI executes a search warrant.
All of this comes just 5 months after the FBI's unprecedented raid on Donald Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, during which agents seized dozens of classified documents. The question of whether to charge Trump for his handling of secrets is much more problematic if Joe Biden is seen as having shown the same negligence. Republicans are freshly in control of the House of Representatives and its powerful investigative committees. They were already planning to aggressively probe the Biden White House. This will be like an accelerant.
Yes, I do. Congratulations and Godspeed.
The new Speaker of the House is leading the charge.
I think Congress has to investigate this. Here's an individual that's been in office for more than 40 years. Here's an individual that sat on 60 Minutes that was so concerned about President Trump's documents locked in behind, and now we find it just as a vice president, keeping it for years out in the open in different locations.
The White House is insisting that, unlike Trump, Biden is fully cooperating with investigators. But it comes just weeks before the president was due to announce his intention of running for a second term. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
With the new year just beginning, the data on how the Earth heated up during the old one just keeps on coming. Research from 6 meteorological organisations around the world concludes last year was the 5th warmest there's been since records were first kept. They aren't just warning about what's already happened, but of course about the future and the risk that the upper limit of another 1.5 degrees could be passed, with all that means for countries at risk and our own.
Somerset submerged again, a Welsh staircase resembling a waterfall.
My living room was knee-high in water.
Scientists say weather extremes like today's flooding will increasingly become the norm.
It is unequivocal that the climate is changing. It's unequivocal that we are causing it, and it's getting worse.
2022 effectively tied for Earth's 5th warmest year.
This is a visual snapshot of today's data, which proves once more our world is warming. Blue is cooler than the average for the last 30 years of last century. Red is warmer. Records go back to 1850, when fossil fuels powered the Industrial Revolution. For every weather extreme, from the bitter winter of 1916 to 17 to the hot summer of 76, globally, the trend has seen temperatures first increase slowly, then this century rise rapidly. The last 9 years, the 9 hottest since records began. 2022, 1.15 degrees warmer than the average between 1850 and 1900. The Paris Agreement had pledged to try and keep warming to 1.5 degrees. At the current rate, we'll hit that in 15 years.
We have never experienced temperatures as warm as it's going to get. Climate change is all about changes in expectation. You take the tube in London, there's no air conditioning on the tube, and now you have 40-degree days. The places where there isn't that expectation of high temperatures, that's where we're going to see the biggest impact.
To cope with whatever extremes are coming our way, new building techniques are being tested in weather-controlled simulators at Salford University, capable of pushing temperatures from -20 to 40 degrees.
We need to make sure that these buildings that we're building today can also work in 2050 and 2080, given the predictions that we've currently got for climate change.
They include the alarming fact, as hot as last year was, it's unlikely we'll ever experience conditions as cool again. Martin Stew, News at 10.
Now, it's taken him 79 days, but Rishi Sunak has finally made his first visit to Scotland as UK Prime Minister. His predecessor, Liz Truss, never made it in her 44 days and had little nice to say about Scotland's First Minister. This evening, Mr Sunak and Nicola Sturgeon had what was being described as an informal and private working dinner. Mr Sunak said he was looking forward to discussing their shared challenges. Louise Scott is in Inverness for us tonight, and quite a few challenges, I think it's fair to say, Louise.
There's certainly some challenges shared and some that aren't. Both will be looking at the NHS crisis and the strikes by unions. This is Rishi Sunak's first visit to Scotland as Prime Minister, and given his predecessor Liz Truss's way of engagement with the First Minister, or lack of, he's keen to show he's going to treat this relationship differently. Earlier he met some emergency service workers here in Inverness before his informal and private dinner with the First Minister, where we understand the topics of funding for the NHS, a second independence referendum and the debate around Scotland's gender reform bill were discussed. Now, this is something the First Minister disagrees on. The Scottish Parliament passed a gender reform bill which would allow those looking to change gender formally a speedier process, but the UK government could be blocking that, and that's something they'll have to decide by next week. And so interesting to see whether any sort of agreement came out of that dinner tonight. Rishi Sunak, he is keen to show the importance of the union, but it's unlikely that he's changed his views in any way around a second independence referendum, previously saying discussing this during a cost of living crisis was just barmy.
Kate Louise, thank you very much indeed for that. Having the electricity or gas cut off and not being able to pay the bills is distressing enough for any household at any time of year. New figures from the charity Citizens Advice show the number of customers on prepayment meters that is happening to has shot up, one somewhere every 10 seconds. Citizens Advice wants a ban on the compulsory fitting of prepayment meters. Without guarantees, customers won't be cut off.
Prepay energy meters like this require money up front using top-up cards or an app. But Citizens Advice says they can leave struggling customers without any power. For Michelle Carter, that's a big fear.
I worry about it constantly. It's a big worry. It's scary because, like you say, if I haven't got it, I can't put it on. And if I can't put it on, my kids have no food, there's no heating, I can't wash. You know, I mean, basic just getting a wash on a morning to go to school. You know, it is scary.
Across Great Britain, 10 million people live in homes with prepay meters, and Citizens Advice says 3.2 million were left without power at some stage last year because they couldn't afford top-ups. They estimate 600,000 energy customers were forced onto prepay in 2022, with 160,000 more predicted this winter. Prepay energy meters have been around for decades, often promoted as a way to escape bills, even though costs are higher than standard. Consumer advisors say their new evidence shows changes are urgently needed.
The situation is so serious now, with so many people not being able to afford to top up prepayment meters, that we're calling for a total ban on energy companies forcing people onto prepayment meters until we see additional protections put in place to stop people from being cut off.
Using smart meters, companies can switch customers to prepay remotely, but entering a home to forcibly change a meter requires a warrant.
This new research says that of those that run out of credit on these meters, around 1 in 5 end up being without gas or electricity for at least 24 hours. So, what does the energy industry have to say?
The sector insists it always communicates carefully with people before moving to prepayment.
How can this be allowed to go on when we know people in 2023 end up sitting in the dark and without warmth?
I think we certainly need to make sure we're doing all we can to work with Citizens Advice, but prepay remains a really important option for lots and lots of people who do find
it's
it
not
helpful.
optional, it's forced on them.
More often than not, people do enter into the conversation, and we have a conversation about whether prepay is the right method for them. Prepay is really important. It does help people to manage their bills.
We've been told that prepay policy was discussed between the energy industry and government earlier this week, as concerns grow that what isn't being properly measured in this industry is the impact on customers unable to pay. Chris Choi, News at 10.
There was more explanation today for the ill-fated first British satellite launch by a Virgin Orbit plane out of Newquay in Cornwall. The rocket the plane was carrying didn't reach its orbit because the upper stage of the rocket cut out too soon. The rocket and 9 satellites it was carrying fell back down to Earth, thankfully into a safe area. A further attempt is not expected until towards the end of this year at the earliest. Now, for anyone who thought they'd perhaps seen a bit too much of Prince Harry over the past few days and nothing of his roundly criticised family, well, 3 of them were out and about today. The King was in Aberdeenshire, looking cheerful enough. William and Kate likewise on Merseyside. The Prince promised well wishes there. He was keeping going.
In the windswept entrance of Liverpool's brand new hospital, a moment for 2 royals to break cover. Thin on crowds outside. Then again, William and Kate's visit was not pre-announced, but they were asked a question about any hurt from Harry's book.
You hurt by the comments in Harry's book, sir?
Inside the Royal Liverpool, a different story. Under pressure staff happy to take a moment away from their own stresses in the NHS and have their new hospital officially open.
I think it's just a real boost, and everyone knows the struggles at the moment, the challenges that we're facing.
They are very cognizant of
the difficulties that we have been experiencing.
Right now, difficulties are not unique to this institution. The monarchy has its own, and an opinion poll today showed how low support for the royals is among young people. So opposite the hospital entrance we found some and asked. So much news this week about Harry's book. Is it made the royal family look out of touch, or is it backfired on Harry? Which is...
I'm different.
Oh, okay.
I think it's good that he's done it.
They disagree on whether Harry should have written his book, but agree on not having a royal family. So given the choice, you'd get rid of them?
Yeah, we'll get rid of them. I'd like to have my head of state someone I decide. I like Harry and Meghan a lot more now since they've split.
If those views were a worry to the King in his coronation year, it didn't show today. He was also back on an engagement, this one in Aberdeenshire, at a centre which helps combat rural loneliness.
Yes, because it's a basic before this. I would try that normally. But do you have a fridge?
And after a chat with a food bank volunteer, he sorted them a new fridge, a personal donation, we were told, to store the food. Back on Merseyside, another project close to William and Kate's heart, mental health. Whatever else has preoccupied the royals this week, the charity knows what this meant to them.
If anyone's got something going on in life or that's a challenge or whatever, what you need is as soon as possible to be getting back to doing the things that you love. And what came out of the visit loud and clear was that the Prince and the Princess deeply care about the work.
Before they left, another reminder, this has been a tough week.
Have you had a chance to read your brother's book at all?
But the family is now back to work. Chris Ship, News at 10, Merseyside.
Finally, the influence, the fame and the sheer genius of the rock guitarist Jeff Beck has been plain to see in the calibre and the personal warmth of the messages of sorrow at his death. 3 Knights of the Realm and all-time greats themselves, Rod Stewart, Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney, were among those recognising him as the greatest. Likewise, Alice Cooper, Ronnie Wood, Robert Plant and on and on. Heartfelt tributes to the rock god's rock god.
His sound on the guitar was groundbreaking, his talent for innovation seemingly endless. Jeff Beck came to prominence with the Yardbirds in the 1960s, replacing Eric Clapton. But it was Hi-Ho Silver Lining, first recorded just after he left the band, that became his best-known hit. In 1967, he formed the Jeff Beck Group with Rod Stewart on vocals and Ronnie Wood on bass. Today, Sir Rod Stewart said Beck was one of the few guitarists that, when playing live, would actually listen to him sing and respond. He won 8 Grammys in a career where he pushed boundaries and inspired generations of musicians.
The combination of the stuff that Jeff Beck pioneered was distortion, sustain, feedback, echo, repeat echo, reverb, all of these things. So, you know, back before there were synthesizers, there was Jeff Beck making his guitar do lots and lots of different sounds.
Countless collaborations saw him teaming up with the likes of the Rolling Stones and performing for world leaders, including this at the White House with Sir Mick Jagger. He paid tribute, saying, "With the death of Jeff Beck, we have lost a wonderful man and one of the greatest guitar players in the world." Beck also teamed up with the likes of Stevie Wonder and last year reflected on a tour with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys.
Went really well, the standing ovation. And they said, "Oh, Brian wants to meet you." And I went, "Oh man, this is it. This is the payoff." And he went, "That was really pretty." And he went straight past me. That was it. I turned around and followed him. Heartbroken. Shattered.
Tonight, Sir Paul McCartney said Jeff Beck played some of the best guitar music to ever come out of Great Britain, and his unique style was something no one could match.
Really pretty homage to the genius of Jeff Beck from those who considered him their hero, who died this week at the age of 78. And that is it for tonight from all the team here. Good night, and we will see you tomorrow.